The Needs of the Many Are a Missed Opportunity. By Elton Gar. This meeting was regularly the worst part of Reginald Ashton's week. It wasn't just that it was a total waste of time. Most weeks he had other meetings that were a waste of time, but this was the only one where no one listened to him. That was because, according to them, they were his equals. And he had to admit that as CEOs, they were better than most people, but equal was a leap that Reginald wasn't willing to make. The CEO of Nexa was only second-generation CEO, and the CEO of VHC was born poor. From what he had been told, his grandfather had been a lowly station commander. And not even a big station. It didn't have more than a couple million people. The rumors were that he had grown up with only 10 servants and no private teachers. Instead, he had gone to a university. As he sat, one of the servants approached him with a glass of wine. He took it without thinking, but then remembered who was hosting the meeting and almost handed it back to her. The last time that Parallax Innovations had hosted this meeting, the wine had been one of the worst things Reginald had ever put in his mouth. Afterwards, his assistant had told him it had been grown on a station and made by robots. That was hardly surprising from Parallax, since they seemed to believe that everything could be automated. And for the average citizen of the Commonwealth, who couldn't afford a good bottle of wine, it would have to be good enough. But Reginald took only the smallest sip to make sure he was right, and then set it aside. Glancing around the massive room, he was impressed by how many of the CEOs had come to this meeting. There were only 2 on video call, and only the CEO of Helix Biologics had sent a surrogate, though from the odd shape of her face she was genetically engineered far beyond even the richest people here. Perhaps old Dexter had finally decided to grow a replacement and retire. Just as well. The man had always looked a bit too alien for Reginald's liking. He had to look at his alien servants often enough, without having humans look like them. But the strangest person here was the CEO of the Pioneer Systems Alliance. Unlike the other CEOs who all lived and operated within a few light years of Earth, so that getting to this meeting was easy, the PSA operated near the frontier. But more than that, they were significantly smaller than many of the others, and even though their profits were rising faster than any of the others, it was still too expensive for them to come to many of the meetings. So, perhaps this was actually going to be worth his time. A few minutes after he sat, the secretary of Parallax Innovation called the meeting to order. A young man who had no good reason to be in this room with the most important people in the Commonwealth. His voice cracked as he told people who controlled dozens of worlds each to quiet down, and then read the minutes for the last meeting. Mostly, that had been an argument between Vitalis Health Consortium and Helix Biologics about the correct price for a vaccine that was to be shipped to some world that Reginald had never heard of. A pointless argument, since no matter the price, it would likely bankrupt the entire world and still not be enough to make shipping it worthwhile. Once he was done with that, he said,
"The CEO of Pioneer Systems Alliances has asked to present a project idea to the exchange."
There were a few murmurs from people, as the name was said. There was no official name for the people who came to this meeting. Even the meeting itself didn't officially happen. It couldn't because a meeting to set prices and agree on other business practices was against the laws of the Commonwealth. But Reginald didn't see the point in pretending that any of that mattered. If someone tried to shut down the exchange, the people in this room would simply spend some money and put a new government in power that was more willing to ignore them. Hazel Etrian was younger than most of the people in the room. Only a few years older than the secretary who had read the minutes, and she wore clothes that, he supposed, some might call practical. But what was the point of the type of wealth and power they had if you wasted your time being practical? She carried herself well, and as she looked around the room, she met Reginald's eyes for a couple of seconds longer than most. That was good. She knew where the power in this room was.
"I'm here to bring you both a warning and a solution. The warning is that we're losing power in the frontier. We've allowed the Scouts and the colony worlds to become far more independent than most of you know. And if we don't do something about it, we're going to have industrial worlds on the edge of the Commonwealth with nothing more than nominal corporate control.
This time, the talking was louder. But no one argued with her. Reginald had said the same thing to his own board, only a few months ago. The frontier was the next source of profits. But with the scale of the war with the Genik growing, the corporations had been making too much money from that to focus on anything else. She let them talk among each other for longer than Reginald would have, but she was good at this, because by the time she spoke again there was almost total agreement that something had to be done, and finding that type of agreement in the exchange was all but impossible.
I have a solution. We need our own fleet of ships on the frontier.
We have fleets,
Reginald said. As the CEO of Astron Dynamics, he resisted the urge to point out that his own corporation had a larger fleet than any of the others. But that was hardly surprising, since most of the ships in the Commonwealth Navy were built in their shipyards.
No. You have a fleet. And each of the other corporations has a fleet. But we don't have a fleet, and as long as we continue that trend, our ships will never be a match for the Commonwealth ships that can draw on the expertise of all the corporations to build something better than any of us could build alone.
Reginald just waved his hand, telling her to go on, then, a bit flummoxed, actually took another sip of the terrible wine and almost spit it out. She was right, of course. But most CEOs had the tact not to bring it up, especially since most of them had stolen considerable amounts of technology from the other corporations, allowing them to nearly match them, at least in the broader areas.
You want us to share our technology?
Marcus Teeter said. The CEO of Ion Tech Solutions was one of the CEOs on a video screen, and so was louder than the others, though of course he could be muted unlike the rest of them.
Not exactly. We already have a blueprint for how to integrate our systems without sharing our secrets. The Commonwealth Navy does it all the time. My suggestion is that Astron Dynamics create a new shipyard, one nearer the frontier where the Commonwealth won't see its construction. And then the rest of you run branches there, just like you do in the Commonwealth shipyards.
I still don't trust Helix Biologics with our autodock technology,
the CEO of VHC said.
As if we have any interest in that backwards tech. I don't even think we need VHC at all. We can provide geneticists who can do anything a doctor can, and our solutions are more permanent.
The spokeswoman for Helix said.
And anyone who doesn't want to be sued for copyright infringement for having children can just turn down the engineering and die,
one of the other CEOs said. Helix hadn't sued for copyright infringement in years, but it had been a major misstep, and one that people loved to bring up because it upset Dexter. But the woman he had sent didn't seem bothered by it. But her lack of reaction didn't slow the arguments in the room, as everyone began to point out the many reasons why the plan wouldn't work. But Reginald didn't care as much as the rest. So long as the Commonwealth had wars, they would always need Astron Dynamic, so his position was safe. And Hazel was right. More than that, he was fairly certain that she knew more than she had said. Because this plan made a lot more sense if she knew that Astron had already begun building a shipyard near the frontier. So he allowed the volume of the room to grow until he was certain that no one else was going to regain control, and then stood up. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Everyone here knew that he was the most powerful person here. His family's wealth and his ties to the Commonwealth went back to the time when humans were confined to Earth. After everyone was quiet, he said,
Astron Dynamics has already begun to work on a shipyard in that area. And we will gladly bring in the expertise of Pioneer Systems in our plans to begin to bring the frontier under control. And if any of you can prove that you have something to contribute, I would consider allowing you to become part of the project as well.
Hazel smiled at him, and he hoped he hadn't taught her the wrong lesson. Her tactic had been reasonable for her position. And assuming she knew he would step in to help, or at least that there was a good reason for him to do so, then it was tactically brilliant. But his willingness to cut them out of the project wouldn't have worked for her, because while she needed them, Reginald didn't.
I suppose we could help to automate the shipyard. But what would we get?
The CEO of Parallax Innovations said. It was hardly a surprise that he would be the first in. Of all the people here, he had the most to gain. There was no reason that there couldn't be as many robots on the frontier as there were colonists, except for the logistics of getting them there.
That's the easy part. Every ship will need a crew. The corporations that contribute will be represented in those crews, and, based on the amount they aid, we'll also be able to appoint the commander of some ships we build.
And if we work together, that should be enough ships that every corporation can have several,
Hazel said, moving back into control of the meeting. And as she did, Reginald sat down, then after listening to her for a few more seconds, waved over a servant and said,
Could you please get me a bottle of wine from my personal reserve? This meeting might go on a while and I can't drink this swill.
Author's note.
This story is my way to introduce two different series that are set in the same universe as the Scout of the Endless Frontier. The first will be Tales from the Commonwealth and be a semi-regular, patron-exclusive series that tells stories from different places and times in the Commonwealth that are either interesting, has some connection to the ongoing stories, or perhaps like this one, both. The other I have yet to name. But it's going to be a more regular series, and the idea is effectively Star Trek, but in a corporate oligarchy. And this story tells the basic origin of the idea. A ship owned and run by corporations, but far enough out on the edge of space that they have the freedom they need to be a force for good, at least sometimes. And I think that balancing act, one that a lot of us have to face, should make for interesting stories. I hope you all agree. Elton Gar.